Hey guys, and welcome back. Today's episode is a companion to our main episode on hydrogen sulfide SIBO called Hydrogen Sulfide SIBO: Why Most Approaches Fall Short and How to Fully Address It Naturally. In that episode, we focused on why this subtype is so often missed and why standard approaches tend to fall short. If you listen to this podcast regularly, you probably enjoy it because we don't stay surface level. We get into the meaty stuff, the details, the nuance, and the why behind what's actually going on, but in a way that's still practical and easy to follow. The whole point of today's episode is to take that conversation one step further and dig into the nitty gritty. I want to walk you through how we actually think about supporting hydrogen sulfide SIBO, not as a single protocol you can take and run with, but as a step-by-step, context-driven process. This is not meant to be something for you to go and do it yourself. Hydrogen sulfide SIBO is complex and highly individualized, and using the wrong tools at the right time can make things worse. This episode is especially for you if you recognize a hydrogen sulfide pattern, you've improved somewhat with diet changes, but still feel reactive, or you're just trying to understand why doing the right thing still hasn't fully resolved your symptoms yet. My goal is to give you a much deeper understanding of how this subtype is approached thoughtfully and intentionally so you can see why it requires a different level of nuance and get some clarity on what some next steps might be. When somebody comes to us and hydrogen sulfide appears to be part of what's driving symptoms, the first thing we focus on is getting clarity. And today, I rely heavily on three-gas breath testing when hydrogen sulfide is on my radar because it allows us to measure hydrogen sulfide breath levels directly as part of the overall assessment. Having access to this testing has made it much clearer and easier to identify when hydrogen sulfide is in play. And this also helps us identify what's going on and shapes everything that comes next, from diet strategy to the types of support we use. Before three-gas testing was available, we often relied on a flatline breath test pattern interpreted along symptoms and history. A flat line can appear on a standard hydrogen methane SIBO breath test because hydrogen sulfide producing bacteria consume hydrogen before it has a chance to rise on a test. Even later in the test window, where hydrogen would normally increase naturally, even on a normal breath test, from large intestinal fermentation. So when that flatline pattern shows up alongside clinical clues like sulfur sensitivity in the diet, urgency of bowel movements or constipation, and systemic symptoms like that body pain or that overall toxic feeling, it can be a strong clue that hydrogen sulfide activity is involved. What we couldn't see at that point, though, with the hydrogen and methane flatline breath test was the degree of involvement, the degree of elevation of hydrogen sulfide gas, or how things were changing over time as we were addressing this overgrowth. So being able to measure hydrogen sulfide directly now gives us more confidence, and when appropriate, allows us to reassess later to make sure we're moving in the right direction. Breath testing gives us important information, and what matters most is how those results line up with symptoms, food reactions, and history, so we can move forward with confidence rather than guesswork. Breath testing still isn't the whole picture, though. In some cases, especially when we're trying to understand what might be happening beyond the small intestine, we'll also use comprehensive functional stool testing as part of the broader assessment, and that can help us see potential elevations in organisms like Vibrio or other sulfur-related patterns, maybe how bile is being used or showing up in the gut, just so that we know other clues that we can to reinforce that we're looking in the right direction when interpreting all of this alongside the symptoms history and the full clinical picture. And then once we've clarified the pattern, the next step is stabilizing the system. We don't wait for perfect data before helping somebody get better. Once we're clear that hydrogen sulfide is likely at play, our first step is to calm the system. So before we try to fix anything, our first priority is helping the system feel safer and less reactive. We dive right into calming the system, which also calms symptoms. And that means calming symptoms, lowering reactivity, and helping people feel more stable as quickly as possible. So the first step is to get some quick wins and get the system ready for what's next. So in practice, this often includes using a low sulfur diet strategically, supporting digestion, and addressing things like motility and gut brain signaling. Reducing reactivity simply means fewer symptoms, less urgency, and a gut that feels calmer day to day. This early stabilization gives the body breathing room and makes the rest of the work possible. Without this step, people often feel like every new intervention just adds fuel to the fire instead of helping. And this is often where people start to feel noticeably better, sometimes for the first time in a very long time, and sometimes dramatically so. We commonly see significant symptom improvement at this stage, but that improvement comes with an important caveat. Many people feel better as long as they eat carefully, yet high sulfur meal away or one stressful day away from triggering a flare. And that tells us we've reduced the load on the system, but we haven't actually addressed what's driving the imbalance yet. And that's where more targeted symptom calming support can come in, not to solve the whole problem, but to keep things from escalating while the deeper work is underway. And this is often the piece what people are searching for at first, especially when symptoms feel intense or unpredictable. In more reactive cases, one of the first priorities is just calming the symptoms down. And when hydrogen sulfide levels are elevated, people often feel inflamed, toxic, on edge after meals, and symptoms can escalate quickly. In these situations, we use tools that help to bind sulfur compounds or reduce hydrogen sulfide activity or support sulfur metabolism temporarily. These supports are not intended to fix the root on their own, but they do play an important role in taking the edge off the symptoms while we're working on the underlying issue. So I think of these tools as stabilizers. They can make things more manageable, but they're rarely the main event. And examples of supports we may consider in this category include number one, bismuth-based compounds, which have been shown to bind hydrogen sulfide and are sometimes used short-term in hydrogen sulfide dominant patterns. Another one is molybdenum, which is a trace mineral involved in sulfur metabolism that can be helpful for some people who feel particularly reactive to sulfur containing foods. We also may use targeted binders used selectively to reduce symptom flares when sulfur load feels overwhelming, and this might be something like activated charcoal. Which of these tools, if any, are appropriate depends heavily on the stool pattern, the bile flow, overall sensitivity, and how reactive someone already is. In some cases, introducing the wrong support too early can actually worsen symptoms rather than improving them. And that's why we use this category carefully and always part of an individualized plan. Now, once symptoms are calmer, we can look more clearly at flow, specifically how things move through the digestive tract. And one of the biggest pieces that makes or breaks progress in hydrogen sulfide overgrowth is motility. Motility is a foundational piece in all forms of SIBO, and hydrogen sulfide is no exception. So, sluggish movement through the small intestine allows bacteria to linger and continue to produce gas, while irregular large intestinal motility can worsen urgency, clustering stools, or constipation or incomplete evacuation. And because hydrogen sulfide patterns don't always present as a simple constipation or diarrhea pattern, we look carefully at where motility support is actually needed for each particular person and tailor it accordingly. This is where hydrogen sulfide patterns can be a little confusing because the stool pattern doesn't always tell us the full story about what's happening upstream. And examples of support we may consider in this category include small intestinal motility support aimed at improving the migrating motor complex. And this may and the migrating motor complex, for those of you who may be new to this, is the natural cleaning wave in the small intestine that comes through between meals and clears the small intestine of food and bacteria. And that's one of the primary problems with all forms of SIBO, is that that motility is slow or impaired. So when we are supporting this small intestinal motility, we may include natural motility supports such as ginger and artichoke based blends, or herbal formulas like iberogast, or in some cases, low dose pharmaceutical prokinetics prescribed by a physician. Meal timing also matters here as well, since frequent snacking can interfere with the gut's natural cleansing waves. We also may be looking at large intestinal motility support depending on the person, and this would be focused on normalizing stool form, timing, and completeness. Depending on the pattern, this may involve carefully titrated magnesium-based supports or other stool regulating agents, or maybe prescription options when appropriate, so certain laxatives or constipation meds. The goal here is to gently restore predictable, comfortable rhythm to the bowel movements, not force bowel movements or overshoot and cause, dumping episodes. So we like to use kind of natural, gentle supports to support a predictable daily bowel rhythm so that things don't back up or rush through. And that way, as we are killing off organisms, your body's able to clear them, versus when we are backed up, they just tend to sit there and get reabsorbed into our body, just feeding into that cycle of feeling toxic. Supporting motility is not just about bowel movements, it's about restoring flow throughout the whole digestive tract. So the gut environment becomes less favorable for bacterial and gas accumulation in the first place. When motility is addressed properly, other parts of the plan tend to work so much more smoothly and hold longer. And once flow is improving, the next place we have to look at is bile, because bile and hydrogen sulfide are much more connected than most people realize. And this is one of the most underappreciated pieces of hydrogen sulfide SIBO, and it's where a lot of stalled cases start to make a lot more sense. Bile plays a much bigger role in hydrogen sulfide patterns than most people realize. We see this especially often in those who've had their gallbladder removed, but bile-related issues can also show up without surgery. Changes in bile acid flow can reshape the gut environment, influencing which microbes thrive, and how well they behave, including metabolic pathways that may increase hydrogen sulfide production. When bile is not flowing or regulated well, it can actively shape which microbes thrive, and that can push sulfur-driven activity in the wrong direction. In these cases, supporting how bile is released, bound, or utilized can make a meaningful difference in symptom and food tolerance. Examples of support we may consider in this category include support for bile flow, which may involve nutrients or compounds like taurine or artichoke-based support that help with bile production, flow, or signaling, particularly in people who struggle with fat digestion or feel worse after high-fat meals. We also might include bile binding strategies. These may be used selectively when excess or poorly regulated bile appears to be contributing to urgency, irritation, or hydrogen sulfide activity. In some cases, prescription bile binders like cholestyramine may be used under medical supervision when bile-driven irritation is suspected. In other cases, fiber-based binders such as partially hydrolyzed guar gum, which is the same as sun fiber, or specific soluble fibers may be considered when excess or poorly regulated bile is driving urgency or irritation or symptom flares. And these approaches can help reduce bile-driven irritation and lower the substrate available to fuel sulfur-reducing bacteria. We also might include digestive support for fat tolerance, such as targeted enzyme support or meal composition strategies to reduce digestive stress and improve comfort while the gut environment stabilizes. This is a highly individualized area of care. The right approach depends on stool pattern, fat tolerance, bile physiology, and overall digestive capacity, and it often evolves as symptoms improve and tolerance increases. Once bile and fat digestion are better regulated, it often becomes much clearer whether targeted microbial support is actually needed and how aggressive or gentle that needs to be. All right, now we're going to talk about targeted subtype specific support. This is the point where a lot of standard SIBO advice stops working and where hydrogen sulfide really starts to behave differently. Once the overall picture points toward hydrogen sulfide involvement, our focus shifts to addressing sulfur-driven microbial activity in a targeted way. And rather than using blanket approaches, we choose tools intentionally based on the person in front of us. This is also where sequencing matters most. Using the right tools at the wrong time can be just as problematic as using the wrong tool altogether. Depending on the situation, this may include specific antimicrobial compounds, sulfur binding strategies, and other targeted nutrition supports designed to reduce hydrogen sulfide activity. So the goal here is not to wipe everything out, but to reduce what's driving symptoms while protecting the rest of the microbiome as much as possible. When the picture points clearly toward the hydrogen sulfide overgrowth, let's take a look at the strategy that we would use. And it looks very different from applying standard hydrogen or methane protocols. And it's one of the main reasons hydrogen sulfide SIBO so often fails to respond to conventional approaches. One important nuance is that bacteria capable of producing hydrogen sulfide can use it as a defense mechanism to improve their survival under stress. And because sulfur metabolizing microbes are well adapted to the gut environment, changes that disrupt the microbiome, including antibiotics, can shift the balance in ways that allow hydrogen sulfide producing organisms to gain a foothold over time. So because of this, we are very intentional about how microbial support is chosen and layered. Examples of support we might consider include number one would be prescription antibiotics such as rifaximin. This is used selectively when symptoms, testing, and clinical context suggest that it might be helpful. Rifaximin can be helpful in some hydrogen sulfide predominant patterns, not by directly targeting sulfur-reducing bacteria, but by lowering overall bacterial load and upstream gas production when used thoughtfully as part of the broader picture. So when we use it, it's usually to create breathing room. It's not a standalone solution. The next thing we would do that would be a little bit more targeted is targeted herbal antimicrobials, chosen based on the microbial pattern rather than applied broadly. And since organisms like Desulfovibrio and Bilophila are gram-negative proteobacteria, certain botanicals are theoretically better suited in these cases. In practice, this may include compounds like oregano oil-based formulations, berberine-containing herbs with attention to formulation, or botanicals like uva ursi used carefully and contextually rather than aggressively. Now, particularly around compounds that can unintentionally worsen symptoms, we want to be cautious, especially in more sensitive cases. Garlic-derived products or strong cholagogues or ox bile supplements might be helpful tools with other digestive patterns, but these things specifically can be problematic when hydrogen sulfide activity is high. These are things that can aggravate symptoms for some people. So I would use these cautiously or avoid them completely. So for example, garlic is high in sulfur. So we wouldn't want to use a garlic-based supplement or like allicin for this purpose. And ox bile, which is a supplement that adds more bile in certain contexts, because bile can create such an environment for hydrogen sulfide overgrowth, would be another one to be cautious with. And again, it's case specific. So there might be cases where it's appropriate, but I would definitely defer that to someone who specializes in this area rather than trying to figure it out on your own with those particular ones. Now, let's talk about gut lining and rebuild support because this is the phase that so often gets skipped. And it's one of the biggest reasons people plateau or relapse. Once symptoms are calmer and the system is more stable, rebuilding becomes essential. Many people with hydrogen sulfide SIBO have been restricting foods for a long time, reacting to meals, and dealing with this ongoing inflammation. And that combination can leave the gut really fragile and depleted. So this work tends to go much better. This phase really should be saved toward the end because it goes much better once inflammation and reactivity are already lower, not while everything still feels raw. And that's why you may have tried some of these supports before, but if you didn't do any of this preliminary work, they may not have moved the needle. But this is the time to bring these things in. So at this stage, we focus on supporting the gut lining with nutrients that can calm irritations, strengthen barrier function, and support sulfur handling. And this may be things like glutamine or zinc acetate or mucilaginous herbs like slippery elm, marshmallow root, aloe vera, or serum-derived immunoglobulins or colostrum when appropriate. We also may gradually restore microbial balance using layered, cautious approaches to probiotics, often starting with spore-based probiotics or Saccharomyces boulardii, and later introducing specific strains like Lactobacillus plantarum 299V based on tolerance. We also might reintroduce prebiotic fibers strategically to support beneficial bacteria without triggering symptoms. And in practice, this may include gentler options such as GOS or galacto-oligosaccharides introduced slowly and titrated based on tolerance. And then we may also be able to rebuild food tolerance in a paced, intentional way so that sulfur-containing foods and other previously reactive foods can be added back over time. And once we do things in this order, we find that this phase is really successful where people are able to add these foods back in and tolerate them. So again, this phase is critical for long-term progress and actually restoring gut health. Without it, people may feel better temporarily, but remain stuck in cycles of just symptoms or restriction or flaring. So this is one of the things that makes progress stick. But we still have to address what set up this pattern in the first place. So we also have to address the root contributors. And this is the piece that determines whether progress actually lasts or quietly unravels later. Lasting improvement depends on understanding why hydrogen sulfide related patterns developed in the first place. For some people, small intestinal motility is a major contributor, so ongoing motility support becomes an important part of your relapse prevention plan. For others, bile flow plays a key role, especially after gallbladder removal, and we focus on supporting how bile is delivered, bound, and utilized so it's less likely to fuel problematic bacteria. We also look at gut-brain signaling, inflammation, and detox capacity using food, lifestyle strategies, and targeted nutrition support. When these underlying drivers are not addressed, symptoms often return even after somebody feels better for a while. Now, I do just want to say this clearly and responsibly. Hydrogen sulfide SIBO is not something I recommend trying to self-treat with a handful of supplements found online. The same tools that help one person can flare another if used at the wrong time or in the wrong context. This is why we emphasize working with a knowledgeable practitioner who can help you interpret symptoms, testing, and response over time, not just apply a generic plan. This kind of guided stepwise approach is exactly how we work with hydrogen sulfide cases at nutrition resolution, and it's what allows people to move beyond short-term symptom relief toward real lasting improvement. The goal is not being perfect with everything. It's not being perfect with diet forever. It's to restore a gut that feels reliable, food that feels less stressful, and progress that actually holds up over time. If this episode helped you to better understand what's actually involved in supporting hydrogen sulfide, that's exactly the point. This subtype of SIBO requires nuance, sequencing, and context, not quick fixes. So if you want to see this approach laid out in writing, I also wrote an article on hydrogen sulfide SIBO and how to address it naturally, and that is linked to in the show notes. And if you're listening and wondering how this might apply to your specific situation, or if you're even barking up the right tree or not, feel free to schedule a strategy call with me. We'll talk through what's going on with you specifically, how to best approach it, and whether or not working together makes sense.